Today, we're running it back. Here are 6 disgusting things that were totally normal in ancient Greece. I hope you're not eating right now. Number 1. Doctors tasting earwax. Imagine this. You've been feeling under the weather for a while, so you finally bite the bullet and head to your doctor. When you get there, he asks you a few questions, and then out of nowhere, he gives you a wet willy. Before you even have a chance to ask what he's doing, he sticks his finger in his mouth and eats your earwax. As gross as this sounds, apparently this was a pretty common practice in ancient Greece, and it all goes back to our favorite urine-loving physician, Hippocrates. Hippocrates, the man behind the Hippocratic Oath that all modern doctors still take today, believed that the human body was like a big sack of flesh holding different bodily fluids, called the 4 humors. These humors were blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Each humor represented an emotional state, and for a person to be healthy, all of these fluids needed to be in perfect balance. So how did you tell if you were balanced and healthy? By tasting them, of course. Hippocrates felt that each bodily fluid, when healthy, was supposed to have a specific taste, and the best way to truly tell if something was wrong with a patient was to simply go down to Flavor Town. So if you were stumped in your exam room, you would munch a little earwax, and if it tasted off, that told you that something was definitely wrong. Like ancient sommeliers, doctors were taught what each bodily fluid was supposed to taste like, so whenever they needed to examine someone, they would know the difference between a healthy person's full-bodied pus with nice notes of spring from the dirty, sock-tasting pus of a sick patient. Oh, and by the way, this didn't end at just earwax. Mucus, urine, and even vomit would be tasted by ancient Greek doctors to determine what was ailing you. Apparently, urine was supposed to taste like fig juice, which just tells me that ancient Greeks definitely did not know how to make fig juice. Number 2. Wiping with stones. We've come a long way in the world of toilet paper, and as anyone who's used a gas station bathroom can attest to, not all TP is created equal. While you can splurge on the stuff that makes it feel like you're sitting on a cloud, there's plenty of sandpaper out there to tear you a new hole. It's a modern luxury we all take for granted, and before the days of toilet paper, people had to improvise. Leaves, moss, pieces of cloth, there were plenty of less comfortable but at least somewhat reasonable substitutes for the stuff. Some Greeks were lucky enough to have a sponge attached to a stick for the job, but not everyone. And the Greeks, as advanced as they were, seem to have gotten this one wrong. See, many of them used pebbles. Yeah, literal rocks to wipe themselves after they did a number 2. Seriously? No one had a better idea? It was common to have a pile of small stones next to your toilet for the job, and not any old stone would do. It had to be the perfect size. Not too big or you couldn't really get the proper angle to clean yourself properly. Not too small or else, you might lose it in there. The perfect stones were apparently not easy to come by, and a popular Greek saying was that 3 stones is enough to wipe. I just hope they had separate piles for clean rocks and used ones. Another common thing they wiped with? Shards of pottery. Shards! I really thought it couldn't get worse than pebbles. Imagine cleaning your underside with something that could be as sharp as broken glass. Did I mention hemorrhoids were extremely common in ancient Greece? I wonder why. Number 3. Athletes. In ancient Greece, athletes were a big deal. As much as we over-idolize professional athletes today, we have nothing on the Greeks. Greek athletes were seen as absolute heroes, just one step down on the tier list from gods. Every single person competing in any sport was the equivalent of prime 90s Michael Jordan. But no billion-dollar shoe deals for these guys. They instead sold other, more disgusting things. But before we get into that, you should also know that no matter what event Greek athletes were competing in, be it wrestling, running, or throwing javelins, you could be certain of one thing. They would be naked. You heard me. Before every event, Greek athletes would strip down to their birthday suits, cover themselves in olive oil, and then take the field. According to most sources, the reason the Greek athletes felt the need to be naked when they competed was to impress and honor Zeus, intimidate their opponents, and of course, show off their muscular, powerful physique. Imagine a full NBA court with 10 giant dudes running back and forth, jumping and dunking with their jingly bits bouncing all over the place. Welcome to ancient Greece. Anyway, over the course of whatever event these Greek athletes were participating in, they would naturally get pretty grimy. Dirt, their sweat, other people's sweat, saliva, and even blood would end up all over their bodies. And after the event, they would clean themselves up by scraping all of that muck off of themselves, and all of this would be bottled up and eventually sold to loving fans. The sweat and general disgusting scrapings were believed to have medicinal effects because athletes were held in such high esteem. The sweat would be rubbed on aching joints and a topical cure for pain. Kind of like icy hot, but even smellier if you can imagine that. Number 4. Treating women with dung. If we've learned anything from our previous videos, we've learned that women often get the short end of the stick when it comes to medical treatments. Unsurprisingly, the ancient Greeks were no different. Like an empire of modern-day incels, Greeks in general held a pretty intense hatred and dislike of women, and they weren't shy about it either. Meandros, an ancient Greek playwright, once referred to all women as silver-coated dirt, while Aristotle felt that all women were simply mutilated and deformed men. I'm sure that made him popular with the ladies. Anyway, since women were seen as being filthy, when one became ill, it was believed that the best way to treat her was obviously with more filth, especially when it came to her, reproductive area. Any woman suffering from discharge was given a delicious mix of wine and roasted mule excrement in order to stop the leakage. Another common practice took place whenever a woman had a miscarriage. In this instance, cow dung was inserted into her, in order to prevent the misfortune from happening again. This practice is also tied to what was known as the wandering womb, where Greek doctors felt that if a woman's womb was not regularly, quote, watered by a man, it would grow restless and wander around the body like a spooky ghost, causing psychological problems to the host. Naturally, the Greeks felt that pleasant odors would draw the womb back to its rightful place, while foul odors would make it move in the opposite direction. So sweet-smelling ointments could be used to attract the womb back home, but if it went too far in a certain direction, a quick whiff of dung would make it retreat. Seriously, I think these guys were just making things up as they go. Number 5. Crocodile dung facials. Turns out women weren't the only ones lucky enough to be prescribed animal poop. Apparently, the dung of crocodiles was seen to help heal scar tissues, rashes, and other skin conditions, primarily around the eyes. Dung was generally considered clean and antibacterial, and crocodiles, while not native to Greece, were brought back from travels to nearby Egypt to help fill the demand for medicine. Like we talked about in a previous video, Egyptians viewed crocodile dung as having special spiritual and medicinal powers, so it's not too far-fetched to assume that the Egyptians did a little show and tell with the Greeks and convinced them to smear the good stuff all over their eyes to heal themselves. The dung would be mixed with water to make it nice and easily spreadable, not to mention exceptionally fragrant, and then the dung would be applied like eyeshadow all around the edges of the eyeball. Yeah, you've got a serious rash going on there. Take some crocodile poop and rub it all over your face. Also, while you're here, do you mind if I taste your pit? The effectiveness of dung as a healing ointment is debated, but if I were to guess, it probably led to a lot of pink eye. Number 6. Fruit and vegetable punishment. We can all admit that certain crimes need to be punished, and sometimes the punishment goes beyond just pain or prison time. Historically, public humiliation was also a go-to form of punishment for many cultures, and the Greeks were no exception. To punish crimes of a sexual nature, the ancient Greeks had 2 practices that turns out both involved sticking a piece of food where the sun doesn't shine. Raponidosis, not to be confused with the spell from Harry Potter, was actually the act of inserting a radish root into the anus of an individual as punishment for adultery, promiscuity, and sexual deviancy. The goal was to not only cause extreme pain to the person, but also humiliate them at the same time, as this was done in a public place where everyone could see the disappearing radish magic show live and in person. There are even some reports that raponidosis was sometimes used as capital punishment, and a radish as big and rough as possible was chosen to encourage internal hemorrhaging and death upon insertion. What a way to go. In addition to radishes, figging was another popular practice in the same vein. Despite its name, figging didn't involve figs or the horrible urine-tasting fig juice from before. Figging was the act of putting a piece of peeled ginger into the anus to cause an unbearable burning sensation. The ginger was peeled into the shape of a plug and stuck right into the chute, causing a burn that was so intense people would need to be physically restrained in order to keep it from falling out. After 30 minutes or so, the ginger would lose its potency. But don't worry, when that happened, it would be removed, peeled a little smaller, and stuck right back up in there to start the process all over again.